Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to Season 2, Episode 19 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode was recorded on November 21st, 2024. I'm your host, Jim Lullis. For more information about the show, including show notes for this episode, please visit straypointers.com. Joining the show tonight are the three hosts of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast, Brad Arnold, Randy Kindig, and Kay Savetz. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Hello.
Thank you. Yeah. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, both of my listeners are going to be thrilled at this. You guys, thank you for sending me some of the stats on the podcast. Now, you guys started your podcast back in 2013.
Correct.
June 18th, 2013. You've got 111 regular episodes, 444 interview episodes, and there were 16 in-show interviews before they were separated out. For a total of, what was that? 400 and almost 500 different people. You're closing in on the 500 mark.
Yeah, we're trying to get there. We're working our way there.
And your total number of listens to date after 11 and a half years is 1,132,138. So the average is about 2,040 downloads per episode. Regular.
That's on the audio version that Randy gets the stats for. I mean, we also publish the interviews go onto YouTube and Internet Archive. So those are, I don't know if they're harder to track, but we haven't tracked them. So yeah. So everybody, literally everybody loves our podcast. That's what I'm saying.
You heard it here.
I'd like to know, before we get into the podcast itself, I'd like for each of you to talk a little bit about what first fueled your interest in home computers. And Kay, let's start with you.
Oh, let's see. I always thought computers were fun. The first computer I think I ever touched in person was in middle school, where there was a TRS-80 Model 3 in the library that you could play with, and I sat down and started fiddling with it. Not far after that, my dad was thinking he wanted to get a computer, and we discussed it, like what computer to get, and we decided the Atari 800 was the thing to get, and he bought one, and I fell in love with it. It was, I do not say this with hyperbole, it was my first love, and it was just like, it was just a fun thing to play with, and play the games and program in BASIC and call into BBSs, and it was just like opened a whole little world. And I don't know, I got that machine and fell in love with it and never fell out of love.
Good deal. Randy, yours?
Yeah, so I'm probably telling my age here a little bit, but our high school didn't have computers. This was mid to late 70s. So my first experience with computers at all was in college. And I remember as a freshman at Purdue University, and we were required to take a computer course. It was a Fortran course. And I just fell in love with the idea of programming the computers. And then, I got into BASIC and actually, did a lot more programming during my engineering undergrad at Purdue. And then I got my first computer in 79 when I graduated, TRS-80 Model 1. And man, I loved that machine. I remember pulling that out of the box and turning it on, and that was a magical moment.
Now, which version of the Model 1 was that? Was that the 4K one or the 16K?
4K level 1 is the one that we bought at the time.
I
was a poor college student, but Radio Shacks were prevalent, and it's pretty easy to get our hands on a TRS-80 Model 1. So, and then my next machine was the Atari, and I loved that, the Atari 800.
Why'd you pick the 800 over the 400?
The keyboard primarily. I definitely looked at the 400 because it was cheaper, but the keyboard just turned me off, and I decided I wanted to have a better keyboard than was offered by the 400.
Brad, what about your first computer?
Well, technically, my first computer was uh, when I was in the Navy. I was going to computer school and learning our mainframe, how to manage and repair our mainframes. And I graduated from the school, got out, and sold one of my motorcycles and went to a computer store. I really wanted an Apple II, but couldn't afford it because other guys around had those. But this computer store had Atari 800, and he had the demo of Star Raiders running, and that was
sold
that.
that sold a lot of Ataris, didn't it?
Yeah,
It did.
yeah. And so I bought a 16K Atari 800 with the tape drive.
Now, did I hear on one of the shows that you probably had one of the first micros aboard a naval vessel?
The first personal. We actually had one. It was it wasn't a Hewlett Packard, but it was another one of the at the time major players in the business industrial arena. But I had the first personal, non-governmental, when I say personal, computer. I had to get special permission to bring it on the ship and strap it down in our work area. It was kind of interesting to have. I booted up Scram once,
Which is a nuclear reactor simulator.
and some of the officers gathered around behind me, watching me, and they were going, "That's classified. How are you doing that? Is that classified?" And it's like, no, this is you can buy it off the store. And they were just they were just blown away, something like this. And I probably sold a couple that right there.
So before the Tramiels came in and laid waste to Atari and that sort of thing, when Atari was still, very active in that 80s marketplace, what was the last Atari machines that you guys had at that time?
The 800 XL was the last machine that I had. My 800 finally gave up the ghost after a couple of years, and I bought an 800 XL, but then I never, as far as the 8-bit go, and then I had an ST before I gave up on the Atari line.
Okay.
The 800 was like the original OG machine, and that my dad had, and eventually he gave it to me. But my second computer, Atari computer, was a 1200 XL that I bought. It was before eBay, but I bought it on the internet in the 90s. It was a used obsolete computer at that point. So I think the answer to your question is just the 800.
Okay. Brad?
Well, I had that 800 and ended up selling it to put a down payment on an Amiga in 85. So I had it for about 5 years.
Okay.
And sold it to a cold worker for, a couple dollars. And, like I said, put a down payment on an Amiga.
Okay. How did the three of you cross paths?
Was it Twitter? It was just Twitter, right?
Well, that's interesting. I don't remember. Was Twitter around at that time? Was Twitter around 13 years ago?
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot of the deals. I think it was via email, actually. So what happened there is in 2013, I had just started Floppy Days in February of that year. And I really wanted to do an Atari podcast as well, and Atari 8-bit podcast. And I went to VCF Southeast, the very first iteration of that in Atlanta that year. I met Brad for just a few seconds. We just crossed paths. And I remember Kay was there actually giving a presentation of some sort. Kay, I don't know if you remember what that was about, but it was something Atari related.
I think he was doing Terrible Nerd, weren't you?
Oh, I bet it was. Yeah, I
No,
bet it
this
was
was
your
before.
book.
No, this was Terrible Nerd came
Was that in
later.
2013?
Yeah, I was probably talking about AtariMagazines.com
Okay,
or
that could be.
one of my websites.
No, terrible. Okay. I'm not going to tell you when your book came out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You're going to tell him when he came out with his book. So I came back from that show and started looking around for people that might want to do an Atari podcast. Of course, Kay, having just talked about Ataris at the show, I remember sending him an email, and then I asked around as far as for AHCS, the Atlanta group, who was the big Atari guy, and I got Brad's name. And I sent both an email and said, hey, are you guys interested in starting a podcast? And Kay says, oh, yeah, I've been wanting to do that anyway. You know, I had the same idea. So that's what started the whole thing.
The thing that I definitely remember, I don't, Twitter may or may not have been true, but the thing that I definitely remember was a Commodore 64 podcast had recently started. And, you know,
Yeah.
since the dawn of time, there's been a rivalry between Atari and Commodore.
Sure.
And whether or not that should or should not be, whatever. But I was a little salty that why does Commodore have a podcast and Atari doesn't have a podcast?
Right.
So I was primed to do an Atari podcast. So when Randy suggested it, I was just like, yeah, sure. You know, we got to show those Commodore people a thing. And I just want to say we have far outlasted that Commodore 64 podcast.
That's true. We far outlasted a lot of other podcasts.
Yeah, you know, the interesting thing though about the Antic podcast is that there are a lot of Commodore 64 heroes that sort of, walk the line between all sorts of 8-bit gear in the day. Like
Absolutely.
Sheldon Lehman, the interview with Sheldon Lehman, he was huge on the Commodore 64 side. And I loved that interview that you did with him. That was just great stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of the hardware, hardware gadgets, computerized, and there's so many that were available for multiple platforms because you had to. So sure, yes, many people played with many different systems.
And there were a lot of people who, worked for Commodore, and then when Jack Trammell bought Atari, came over to the Atari side of things.
Sure.
So there's a lot of crossover.
So what was the climate like for podcasting in 2013? Was it, right now it's a pretty low bar if you want to get your own podcast and put it out there. And Randy, you said with your Floppy Days podcast, you had a little bit of experience at this, but
well, like 3 months, 3 months or 4 months at the time. Yeah.
So what was it like in terms of trying to figure out the equipment, the show format, the software, the editing process, that whole thing?
I believe Randy was already familiar with Libsyn and he was just like, okay, this is the platform that I know how to use. That's what we're going to use. And I was just like, fine. I had a buddy who was, and still is, a voice. He's an actor in commercials, and he's a voiceover guy. And he just gave me all the advice. He's just like, buy this particular microphone. And, he told me what to buy. So the hardware, and I think everybody else just did their own thing. And I kind of knew how to use Audacity, which was what we were using at the time for editing. It was free. It was good enough. And just sort of figured that out. That wasn't really difficult. It was just fiddling around with it.
Now, when did the interview side sort of take a life of its own and diverge from the main podcast?
Yeah, that's a funny story.
Is it? Yeah, I want to hear your version. I want to hear your version of the story, Randy.
Okay, so the way I remember this is that in the early episodes, interviews were one of those things that both Kay and I had an interest in doing, and we went out and got interviews. And I remember somehow it turned into a contest, like who could get the most interviews, and eventually the interviews became so numerous that we quit. Early on, we did the interviews actually as part of our show. We'd actually put them in our show. we got to the point where there were so many interviews and they were so long that we kind of spun that off to its own thing. And then at that point, Kay just went ballistic with interviews and hasn't stopped since. Kay, I don't know if you remember it that way, but
No,
I
that's
remember
pretty
there was a
close.
lot of competition going on early
Yeah,
on.
there still is, and I'm winning.
That's true. That's true.
So yeah, we would do the first. First, we started doing an interview, and insert it as part of our magazine style, whatever. And so, we talk about what we're up to and the news, and here's an interview, and then we come back and do whatever. And interviews were getting numerous, and some of them were long.
Right.
I talked to one guy, and it was a great interview, but it was 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And there are some people who just want to hear the episode and don't want to hear a 2 hour interview. And there's some people who want to hear a 2 hour interview, but not lost in the middle of an episode that's, now whatever, 4 hours long. So anyway, it just made sense after a short time to pull them out and make them separate. And it felt more fair to the people who were being interviewed to have their thing be its own thing rather than part of, you don't have to listen to us talk crap to each other first.
What was the response like then for your listeners? Did you have people that would only tune in for the interviews, people that would only tune in for the magazine style show, anything like that?
Probably, but I don't feel like we got that level of input from people.
We haven't gotten that much feedback. I know we throw that question out there every once in a while, and some people say they really enjoy the interviews, and some prefer, the regular shows. But I think it's fairly even in terms of, and then, some people just enjoy all of it. Anytime you're talking Atari computer, they want to hear it.
So what was the reception like for the early episodes as far as numbers of listeners and accolades and that sort of thing?
I recall early on, we were probably it really hasn't changed a lot over the years. After the first year, we were probably up to about 1,000 downloads per episode, and it's been pretty constant. We'll get 1,000 in the first month, and then over time, it'll grow to, a couple thousand, and that's how we have an average of about 2,000 per episode and interview show. But I don't think it's changed a lot. I think we've lost people over the years, we've gained people over the years, and it's been, I think the response has been terrific. I don't know what you guys think, Kay and Brad, but
I think that I always try to keep in mind that we are a niche within a niche of podcasts. There's retro computing, which is a niche-y thing, and there's a lot of great general interest retro computing podcasts like Retro Computing Roundtable, which I really enjoy. There's a bunch of them. And then, but we are focused only on this one particular machine, the Atari 8-bit computers. So, if we don't have a lot of listeners, whose fault is that? It's ours for picking this very specific subject.
Was that even a factor, or did you guys say that we're gonna put out a dozen episodes and see where we go from here, that sort of thing?
I don't think so. I think we went into it for the long term. At least I did.
I mean, I guess, I was ready to bail out if these other guys sucked, but they didn't. And
and yet he hasn't bailed yet.
Did you do any type of, I'm assuming there was no paid advertising or anything like that, but did you use social media and bulletin boards and that sort of thing to kind of get the word out?
I used Twitter. Randy kind of was the Facebook guy. Brad, as you can see, is so talkative and gregarious that he just got the word of mouth out, just that way.
And Brad knows everybody. So, he just having him on the staff, so I say staff.
Are you guys members of local users groups? Do they still have groups where you actually go and meet face to face?
Yeah. I actually started one here in Indianapolis area because we didn't have one. Started one about 7 years ago. And Brad, I know you're a member of a local one there in Atlanta.
Yeah, me and another guy started it, and then we had roughly about a year later, we had our first VCF show, because we wanted a show, so we had a show.
That was that first Southeast show
Yeah.
that I was talking about. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I helped start. I was second fiddle in starting an Atari group here in Portland, Oregon. Um, it has kind of faded away. I think, COVID kind of killed it, and the other guy had some life changes, and he hasn't really come back. But I think he and I are the other ones who miss it. So
What doors, if any, has the podcast open for you all?
it's been a massive time suck.
What
I
doors?
have met also, I mean, through the interviews that I've done, so many interesting people,
That's
and
yeah.
so many people who are heroes to me, and some of them I just got to talk to and have an hour conversation with, and it was fine. And some of them have become friends, and um, some of them we became friends, and then they died, and then I went to their funerals. I mean, so for me, it's I haven't, it's cost me time, it's cost me a lot of money, but it's absolutely been worth it because I got to be a part of this community and talk to all sorts of interesting people, and so it's been a joy for me to do that.
Yeah, I second that. It's been great to meet and talk with so many people, and not only interviews, but at the shows. I mean, I attend at least 3 or 4 computer shows every year, and so many people stop by because they recognize the Antic name, and they may recognize me, they may not, but they know who we are and stop by and talk for a while, and it's just great to meet those people.
Do you see an end in sight for the podcast?
Well, I'd like to announce my I'm resigning right now.
Yeah, I didn't mean to instigate
We're
anything.
we're not paying you enough, Kay. Is that
I, I'm happy to just keep doing this until it's not fun anymore, but
agreed?
but it's still fun, and that's all I can say.
In fact, we're recording this weekend, and we try to be very regular and plan on continuing to do at least one a month, as well as many interviews as Kay can possibly pump out.
Has it just been the three of you? Because I know that Bill Kendrick had been on the show for, off and on with the ones I've listened to, I think might have been pre-recorded segments.
We've never had any other permanent members. We've had people who have been kind of an adjunct, Near Derry being one of them, Bill Kendrick, Bill Lang. I mean, we've had a lot of people who have been on the show several times.
Sometimes we have a guest host, just
Yeah.
pop in, just whatever, just because it's fun and mixes it up.
Is there any memorable guest hosts or interviewees? Any that stand out?
Well, I remember Kay and I got to interview Nolan Bushnell. That was pretty
Very
memorable.
nice.
Yeah. That I have to give Kay credit for getting that one. I don't know how he got that set up, but that was very cool to get to talk to Nolan.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've heard that one. I'm going to have to go back and find that one. I like the ones with the folks from these classical computing magazines, like when you had interviewed David All and Sheldon Lehman. Orson Scott Card was on the show, or he was on one of the interviews. And gosh, I think he's more Atari versus Commodore. I think he's more Atari biased than you guys are.
One of my favorite things is to interview people. It's happened a few times now. Interview people who are super famous, but I interview them only about their Atari stuff and not about like the
Right.
fact that they're yeah. One of the guys I interviewed, I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. He's a host on, at least he was, on CBS Sunday Morning. He's like a very famous television news correspondent and stuff. Like, let's talk about Atari.
Any memorable moments with these folks? Because I've listened to some of the interviews, and there's names that I knew from the computing industry. And when I got to listen to them, in some cases they just start rambling on about weird things like, fruit curing cancer or something like that. And you just have to sort of, but you guys let them go and you did the whole interview with them.
I once interviewed kilobaud microcomputing guy, the ham radio operator, Wayne Green. Thank you, Brad. And I interviewed him for something, and he starts. I was interviewing about computer magazines, and he starts trying to tell me that he knew the true secret of what happened to Amelia Earhart, and it was something like she had lived and where she was, and
I was secret of cold fusion.
Yeah, and I was just like, that's very nice, crazy old man. Tell me about the kilobaud microcomputing magazine. He was interesting. I had someone tell me once about how Atari, I think it was in Japan, and how there were murder attempts, and some Atari executive got pushed onto the subway platform, by a Japanese mafia thing because Atari wasn't paying off the mafia or something like that. So there's been crazy stories and also crazy stories. The funny thing, and people will come up to me and they'll say "Oh, I just heard your interview with so-and-so," and ask me some very specific question about this interview that they just listened to. I'm just like, my dude,
maybe you did it 3 years ago. Right?
I did that interview in 2017. I do not remember.
Yeah. I have people do the same thing to me. It's like they ask me details about something that I did the interview 5 years ago. And it's like, heck, I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it again because I don't remember anything about that interview.
Guys, I want to switch gears here just a little bit. I know that the three of you have probably written your fair share of BASIC code in your time. BASIC co-creator Thomas Kurtz just passed away, and I think we just hit BASIC's 60th birthday sometime over the summer from when that version of BASIC was released. Can you tell me a little bit about your days with BASIC? What was the most memorable early BASIC program that you remember having written or worked on?
I can go first because mine will be quick. I'm not a programmer. I can't program. I'm trying again for the umpteenth time to learn BASIC because I don't program.
Okay.
But I will say though that the one time though I did soldier through it is an early compute magazine had a D&D dice roller or character generator or something.
Mm-hmm.
And as usual, it had errors, and I typed it in, and I then spent, I don't know, a day, two, adding a little bit to it, and it worked. And that was just like, whoa, I did something, and that was it. And but I also learned that I have limits, and programming is not my not one of my things.
So do you have a goal for a goal or a pet project of some kind that you're trying to apply learning BASIC to now?
Not really. I do have a program I want to write just because, they always say you should have something you want to do to go for. So I pick something to, as I'm trying to learn it, to, work on, but no real dream project or anything like that.
Okay. Randy or Kay?
So I remember, most of my experience with BASIC probably started when I got that TRC Model 1. And originally it only had the level 1 BASIC, which was like tiny BASIC. So BASIC wasn't very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
But I did upgrade it eventually to the level 2, which was a very, very nice, very powerful BASIC on that machine. I don't remember. I mean, I remember doing a lot of programming on it. In fact, at the time, because I was a nuclear engineer, I was working at a nuclear power plant that was being built. And I remember taking home some programming work to do on my TRC Model 1 to help with the design and administration,
Oh, very
I guess,
interesting.
of that nuclear power plant. So I did some engineering type programming in BASIC at that time. It's probably the most memorable thing I remember about programming in BASIC at the time.
Very cool. Okay.
Well, back in the day, in the 80s, my big program, biggest basic program I made was called the Kevin Comics Cartoon Creator, which was a program for making ASCII art for BBSs, basically
Oh,
making little animations. It's like there was a program that existed was in machine language that I was using, was called LeBreak. And if you were doing an animation or whatever, and you made a mistake, it made a typo or whatever, and you could hit the delete key, the way it would erase that last character was by re-rendering the entire thing. And it kind of happened quickly, but I have to redraw everything from the beginning. And I thought it was silly. I was just like, it should just be able to go back one character. Or if the last character was down arrow, it could do up arrow. I mean, it seems like it could. So I made this program in BASIC and distributed it in BBSs and added features like you could like type a message and it would render it automatically in a big font. I had created these fonts and it would just be like hello, in giant letters. Anyway, that was my big program back in the day. In the more modern times, in the last decade, and this all happened with while the podcast was happening. I got involved with the basic 10-liners contest, which is where you try to make a game in 10 lines of basic code. And since my Atari Basic days, I mean, basics have gotten better. There's more powerful basics for the Atari, and so I've made some games that I'm pretty proud of. And writing 10 lines of very compact code that makes a complete and fun and playable game is a real challenge. So, I did one a few years ago called Floody Bot, which is pretty fun. I did another one. Let's see. I don't know. I did one called Fort Knox, which I really enjoy, kind of maze games.
very good.
Yeah. So
I did one. I've never entered the contest. I was going to enter that 10-liner contest a couple years ago, and I wrote one that was just the simple. I'm thinking of a number between 0 and 99, that sort of guess number game. But if you guessed wrong, it would continue to insult you, and the insults would get a little heavier throughout playing it. And I thought that might not have been very well received, so I never did enter it. But I did it in 10 lines, and it was a lot of fun. Kay, you mentioned other dialects of BASIC and other implementations of BASIC.
yeah.
What were your favorite BASICs, interpreters, compilers? And it doesn't have to be on the Atari platforms.
Well, they will be. I mean, the one that I have done, I had used for all of the 10-liners things is called Turbo Basic XL, which is a very nice, adds a bunch of very nice features. So that has been my favorite. There's a newer one now called Fast Basic, which looks awesome, and I think it would be the one that I love now. The last time I tried to get it running on my Mac, it couldn't be done or not easily, and I wasn't having fun with trying to make it work. I believe it's plug and play now, but I haven't tried it since. And so anyway, that's my answer. While we're talking about BASIC, really quick, I want to put a plug in for a book that I read a few years ago called Endless Loop: The History of Basic Programming Language, by
I have that one.
Mark Jones Lorenzo. It talks about how Kemeny and Kurtz created the language, and then how BASIC became the popular language, and all these offshoots happened that Kemeny and Kurtz kind of hated because they lost control of the language they created. a very interesting story.
Randy and Brad, did you guys have a particularly favorite dialect or compiler?
I got into machine language, and really the couple programs that I wrote for the Atari were actually in machine language, in 6502
Okay.
machine language. Basic wise, Fast Basic is the one that fascinates me right now. I really want to get in and learn Fast Basic and actually write some stuff with it. And it's just so powerful, and it's compiled, and it's just a really nice implementation of Basic on a 40-year-old machine.
Very good. When we were exchanging emails, your names came up, Brad, Randy, and Kay. And I noticed with the first letter of each capitalized, that's a break instruction in 6502, which is the 0th opcode in 6502. So I think you guys were destined to have crossed paths.
Wow.
I never noticed that.
That's deep.
That is,
Nice.
well, something's deep.
That's Zen-like.
So if you guys could send a message to other retro computing podcasters, what would that message be?
Get off the air. Make more room for us. Steamroll you.
Yeah,
we've been doing this for 13 years or whatever. Well, I don't know. And we're going to do it another 13, and you're going to be gone and forgotten. We're going to, I don't know.
If you're not talking about Atari, then, what are you doing on the air?
Is there anything we haven't covered that you guys would like to talk about?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. In the question to your last question, I think that the great thing about podcasting is it's open to everybody, and you can come out there and say whatever you want, and if there's an audience, then you'll find it, and for better or for worse. And we have our little pod of listeners on Antic who like to hear about our little projects and hear our little interviews, and I would do this podcast even if nobody listened other than me and Brad and Randy. It's
oh yeah, you guys alone. If you listen to this one, you're going to more than double my listenership. So this is great.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Kay said a few minutes ago is like when I started, me and the other guys started the computer club here in Atlanta for, I don't know, like almost 6 months. It was just me and him. But we kept doing it. And the podcast is just keep doing it as long as it's fun. Do it for yourself, because if you're doing it for money, well, don't listen to me. I don't have advice for you.
Very good.
I really enjoy doing it. One thing it does, it forces me to jump in every month and see what's going on in the community. I mean, I try to stay abreast all the time, but things, for whatever reason, there are things you just don't notice or you don't see happen. And it kind of forces me to spend some time each month making sure I know what's going on in the Atari community. And
I absolutely agree. And like
sometimes
you need to be, I need to be forced to do my hobby, and simply having a deadline of, we're doing a podcast in 3 days. What's going on in the Atari world? I haven't thought about it, but like, let's look at the Atari Age forums, and holy cow, someone came out with a new gadget or a new piece of software that looks like a lot of fun. So just like having to do it makes it so that I do the thing that I enjoy doing.
Now, how scripted are your shows? Do you guys just get together with a little bit of info and kind of go ad hoc through the whole thing, or is it heavily scripted?
We have a show note. I'm sorry, you can do it, Randy.
No, I was going to say, yeah, we do have show notes. I think it depends on the person too. I mean, Kay, all he needs is a headline and he can talk for 20 minutes about it. I try to put as much detail as I can for each thing I'm going to talk about during the show. And I think Brad's probably more along those lines as well. So it depends on who you're talking about, but we do have a full set of show notes prepared before each show. So we know what we're going to talk about. each person's responsible for some section of that, and they handle it.
Great. Guys, I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you for being on the show here.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's been
for having
fun.
us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
no one's ever had all three of us on their podcast before, other than the whole group was on Floppy Days, my other podcast, but no one else has had us on their show before, had they,
Great.
guys?
No,
I'm breaking new ground again.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
right.
That's right.
All
Just
right.
BRK.
That's right. Thanks again, guys.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. Let's do this again soon. Take care.